Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan, and today we're coming at you with the midweek update in the world of cannabis. Now, before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learned something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos. Then there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. Try to think of it as a time capsule. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the US industry, identify top US MSOs that you keep seeing pop up that you think will be worth more in the future than they are now, and take advantage whenever you feel ready, of course pending whatever incremental reform we are waiting on. While we know safe is a when not if scenario, we do have a deadline for December 2nd for that HHS and DOJ scheduling review. But in the meantime, we start with some state stories. As Missouri is crushing it, legal weed sales are averaging 4 million a day. Talk about a success story since launching for adult use in February, as after just 5 months, they've totaled 592.3 million in cannabis sales already and expect to top $1 billion in sales by the end of the year. And so this data comes from the Missouri Division of Cannabis Regulations, and the benefits don't stop there according to MO Trade, as thus far already more than 8,000 jobs have been created in the industry, and no doubt citizens love this legal opportunity, and that number will likely continue to grow as next week the state will begin accepting applications for businesses interested in opening cannabis micro businesses. Applications are due by August 10th, and this is how you provide equal access to opportunity without using the social equity buzzwords that unfortunately ruins the industry for everyone. So love to see Missouri crushing it. Well, we got an update out of Maryland as Maryland's cannabis market experiences surge in sales as adult use program launches on July 1st. And so we're just 19 days in. And so while I invite you to pause to read some good information here, there's a lot more data provided here. Now, I'm not going to click on every single one of them because it's going to require opening new pages, but there's at least 6 different data points that you can check out. So I recommend grabbing the link in the description if you're interested. Otherwise, I'll just leave it here so that you can pause to read for a summary on Maryland. But they're 19 days in, crushing it as well, and seeing the benefits of ending cannabis prohibition. And so with that, on to this one from Green Market Report, as Massachusetts leads in New England's cannabis markets. Imagine had New Jersey or New York done things differently. Clearly they'd be leading based on the population, but based on the circumstances, Massachusetts, an older, mature East Coast market, is leading the way because they haven't screwed it up as badly as some of the new states. But just to cover what's featured, Massachusetts, Green Market Report forecast for 2023, 1.6 billion. While New Jersey comes in second place with the Green Market forecast of 720 million. How sad and pathetic when you realize this is because they've only chosen to open roughly 45 legal dispensary outlets. How is that going to offset the black market? But we know that if they open double or even 10 times that to properly supply the population in New Jersey, they would be crushing it. So it's ultimately theirs to lose right now as they're shooting themselves in the foot following how Quebec did it in Canada. While Connecticut, a Green Market forecast of 285 million, they come in third place, while Maine with a Green Market forecast of 194 million in fourth place, while Vermont comes in fifth place, Green Market forecast of 55 million, and then you got New York, sixth, somehow, Green Market forecast of just 40 million because they've done everything wrong, by far the worst cannabis industry in the country, unfortunately. And until we get those Marxists out of power, I don't see how that's going to change, while New Hampshire is in seventh with their medical-only program. And an update out of New York, while we're on it, might as well laugh, Brad Racino shares that tomorrow's CCB meeting includes the authorization of an additional 212 CAURD licenses, bringing the total to 463. We can issue licenses, but we cannot facilitate the opening of dispensaries for you guys. No shit. And so they've gone from 150 licenses to 300 licenses to 463. Well, I'm pretty sure they've only got, they're claiming that they've opened their 20th legal store, but again, it's just laughable when they've got 1,500 illicit ones actually running the city. And with that, apparently there had been a bit of a crackdown. Well, New York prosecutor begins cracking down on illegal cannabis shops with $400K deal with shop owner. Get this, a New York City entrepreneur who illegally sold cannabis at a dozen shops across Manhattan must pay more than $400,000 in taxes and proceeds from illicit sales of cannabis as part of a crackdown on the thousands of unlicensed operations in the city. But get this, the Manhattan DA, that's Alvin Braggs, who's trying to turn the U.S. into a banana republic by following through with these ridiculous charges on former President Trump, office announced Tuesday that business owner Rami Al-Zandani would not face litigation as part of a non-prosecution agreement. He can keep his stores open, but he can no longer sell cannabis products. And so you think that's really going to be a crackdown when you allow them to pay to continue to play? Like, it's just absolute horseshit. And so a prime example of a clown DA that doesn't actually prosecute criminals, facilitating more of the same behavior, because clearly you get bigger rewards and less punishment when you're an illicit operator in New York than when you're following the legal hoops. It's mind-blowing. And get this, they couldn't wait to just squeeze this in the third sentence. Did you know that we've now issued more than 250 licenses? Although we don't want to mention the 1,500 illicit dispensaries running rampant and the fact that we've only opened 15 or 20 legal ones. And so it's just mind-blowing, and you can pause to read the rest down here. But last bit out of New York for Marijuana Moment, as on top of that, New York City seeks private lenders for new cannabis fund to promote industry equity. Safe banking 2.5 years ago would have gone a long way to facilitate this, but since Schmuck has not passed that, we continue to see struggles, especially big ones out of New York. But they think the New York Cannabis Loan Fund will. It's really just hard to fathom at this point the lack of self-awareness these delusional Marxists have, and nothing's going to change until they get voted out of power and we see some major policy shifts. But until then, they don't want you to trust your eyes, they just want you to trust what they say, because the state will take care of you now, as the Cannabis New York City Loan Fund will help cement New York City as a trailblazer in equitable cannabis industry investments. Who are you talking to? What planet are you living on? Go look at Missouri and Maryland and shut up and, adopt some of what they're doing if you want to see some equal access to opportunity. And well, we got this one from Westward looking at the state of Colorado, as the cannabis industry in Colorado, not the entire U.S. industry, is on pace for another annual dip in 2023. So we do have to face the harsh realities that some of the more mature Western markets are facing, as apparently they had what was dubbed the worst 420 in 5 years. And it is just interesting to note that usually a Canna shares the data around 420 and what the sales were. This year we didn't get that, or at least it didn't come across my page. Mind you, there's many other stories I can cover. Just interesting to note that obviously sales weren't record-breaking in probably a lot of the more mature states, therefore it wasn't featured. But apparently Colorado dispensaries had a tough May. So what does that mean overall for Colorado though? Through the first 5 months of 2023, Colorado saw just over $650 million in cannabis sales. The DOR numbers show that puts dispensary sales on pace to total about $1.56 billion this year, which would be a 12% dip from the $1.77 billion in sales in 2022. $1.5 billion is still impressive and something to be proud of, but maybe the recent passing of a bill that would allow online sales might help this. It's going to take some time to see that come through, but and over 32% less than the record $2.23 billion in sales in 2021. But we know why this record happened: these stimulus checks. Without it, we would not have seen that surge in cannabis sales. And whether that's a good thing or not in the long run, we'll wait and see. But there's more here if you wanted to pause to read about Colorado. But essentially, this is just a cool visual of them starting in 2014, hitting the peak in 2021, and then coming back down to where they are now. Do you think they're heading all the way down, or might they stabilize and head back up? I don't know. I'd like to think that's the case, but please let me know in the comments what you think about Colorado there. While we've got this one out of Nevada, another tough market in the West Coast, close to California, where all the black market cannabis is. Mind you, Nevada wholesale cannabis prices continue a bumpy ride. And so I'm just going to share a bit of info here, as April 2023 combined medical and adult use sales saw just over 72 million, down 3.9% from March 2023 of 75 million, and down 7.8% from sales of 78.2 million last April. And so you can pause to read most of the breakdown from May to April, looking at sales and the percentage change. And then just if you're interested, I know it's not a market I talk about as much, not as many of the MSOs are in it, but for adult use cannabis sales, medical and wholesale cannabis price analysis, and a little bit of a visual here. This is wholesale in Nevada only, again, not the entire U.S. cannabis industry. And so with that, on to the legislative news that we are waiting on, and MJ Stock Trader reminds us that there are 7 more days left, and we do not know what is going to happen. It is out of our control. We know that SAFE is a when not if scenario, but it looks like the Senate has 8 more session days before they head home for all of August. They come back September 8th. Now, he tweeted this yesterday at 8:22 p.m., which means as of right now, there are 6 more days left. And so just leaving that there to show you. So with that, I wanted to try and provide 2 of the most likely and contrasting scenarios, one being the best case, most optimistic scenario, the other one being the less than best case but more realistic, if we've learned anything from watching politicians over the last 2.5 years. And so while Wall Street Unicorn asked a good question, Don, can we expect anything before August recess? Don Murphy, one of our most loyal DC lobbyists who is very vocal on Twitter, so we thank him for that, gives his best take, as I think we'll get that last GOP sponsor, and Dem leadership won't be able to point their collective fingers at Republicans. They'll have little choice but swallow Section 10 and vote safe banking out of the banking committee. But this doesn't mean a vote on the Senate floor. This means doing the markup and passing it out of the committee, waiting for an eventual vote. And that's the best case scenario I think we can really hope for. And of course, folks, if you haven't yet, please consider calling your senator to help. These are 3 GOP sponsors, and if we can get one more, that confirms that SAFE is filibuster proof. And so obviously we can help make this happen and Don's best case scenario come true. But the more likely other one, if politicians still don't even listen, from connoisseurs.io, as Pablo Zuanic predicts, safe banking will drag on until the fall of 2024, but it will pass ultimately then. And so more time, and ultimately my thesis and my plan has just changed. I did end up getting that new job, and so hopefully by September, I'll have some money that I can start sending to my TFSA. And oh, how interesting it is when the tables turn, especially comparing my short-sighted, greedy self from a few years back that wanted safe now, mostly because most of my self-worth and value was in the numbers in my investing account. Now, I see that the longer this takes, the better for me. Now, again, I want safe to pass for every entrepreneur and person in the industry that was lied to by the Dems, and if I could have my way, it would be descheduled tomorrow. Obviously, I can't, but while I've been envious of anyone that's new to my channel and started accumulating now, at least I get to join you in doing that if it were to be the worst case scenario and take until the fall of 2024. And so, of course, you can pause to read this little bit here. Mind you, this is a full write-up from Pablo, about 18 pages. I'll put the link in the description if you want to go through that. But so hopefully that was a good contrast of the two possible outcomes. Mind you, this is also something to consider. A semi-evolved mammal has been calling out more leaders to be vocal on Twitter if they can. The most vocal ones are Jason Wild of TSND and Boris Jordan of Cureleaf. And Boris shared his 2 cents in response to semi-evolved mammal calling more of them out, saying some are talkers, some are doers, Jason Wild excluded. SAFE is working its way through Congress as it has to, slow and steady. But then he adds, don't expect finalization until February of next year. And while that sounds crazy, keep in mind finalization could be actual passage of the bill, and that could very well be a sell the news event based on catalysts we get in the fall. Now, again, I'm just speculating and thinking out loud here, but let me know in the comments what you think. But then he adds, Dems want this as close to elections as possible, and we know that's very likely true. Everyone is doing what they can, some more, some less, and so there's more down here if you wanted to pause to read. I essentially just wanted to share this as more contrast to what could potentially happen so that you can plan accordingly for your own situation. But with that, from MSO News, the big news that we got this week is Cureleaf also seeks to reorganize its U.S. assets to list on the TSX, much like TerraSend did. And so we don't know a whole lot now, but it seems Cureleaf is making the moves to do so. Obviously, we'd like to see more MSOs do that, but essentially just wanted to share what we have thus far on it from the deepdive.ca. While there was another source, March 2 Millions, that shared this filing from SEDAR as Cureleaf to TSX per the filing. They announced this on May 1st, 2023. And so interesting that they announced it quite a while back and had been kept quiet until now. But if and when this happens, just under 1/3 of MSOS assets will trade on a major exchange and presumably be able to be held directly as opposed to via swaps. And this is something I have a hard time explaining just off the cuff. But when he says held directly, this would be through a direct custodian that holds the actual stocks as opposed to the swaps workaround that they've had to figure out because of the federal illegality. And so progress is a process. These are very interesting times, so I do invite you to pause to read if you're interested. While on top of that, we did get some news out of New Jersey Biz that Cureleaf plans more South Jersey layoffs as the multi-state operator made the difficult decision to eliminate 49 positions at its cultivation facility and will be scaling back production because we have ample supply to meet the market's current needs. However, the New Jersey market doesn't want to open more dispensaries to provide that. And so I think this is more of a fuck up on the New Jersey regulators than Cureleaf. I don't know about you, but obviously if New Jersey was more business friendly and wanted to help this industry thrive, they would open more facilities that would allow that supply in the cultivation facility to be sold through, and so these people would still have jobs. That's the way I see it. I could be wrong. Let me know in the comments what you think. Otherwise, you can grab the full link in the description below. While Air Wellness Cannabis Dispensary strengthens Florida footprint with 3 new retail locations. Good to see Air keeping their head down and continuing to execute as the opening of Air Cannabis Dispensary locations Orlando, Winter Haven, and Orlando number 2 expand the company's retail presence to 62 throughout Florida and brings Air's total footprint to 86 stores nationwide. And so a bit more down here about Air in Florida if you wanted to pause to read. Well, on to the next one from Semi-Evolved Mammal. As per investing in Can 1, who is Dan Aarons, the portfolio manager for the MSOS ETF, apparently TerraSend, since they've facilitated the move to the TSX, is no longer on the Bank of New York Mellon's and Pershing's restricted list. So I think it's fair to say that what we saw on Sunday until now, a long list of banks easing restrictions and now even more added to that list, is we are seeing the benefits of TerraSend uplisting to the TSX in real time, as if they're taken off the restricted assets list, then more banks might be willing to take custody of the shares, and that swap workaround is no longer needed, therefore eventually facilitating the opportunity for more institutional investment to come in once they get that safe harbor language and we see, a bit more clear of what's going to happen with SAFE. And so just thinking out loud, what do you think? Let me know in the comments. But last one, just had to share this as Jason Wild has been on a roll. So question is, where to next, Jason G. Wild? The Supreme Court? That would be fucking awesome. And obviously that's wishful thinking, but something being struck down, like like the federal regulations as unconstitutional would also be a dream outcome that might force, the government's hand sooner than later, and something that would be necessary at this point in time. But with that last bit of interesting news, as Philip Morris acquiring cannabis inhaler developer Psych Medical for up to $650 million. So you cannot say that big tobacco and big alcohol are not watching this industry very closely. And while I imagine they're taking their time before making any big investments, this is the latest that we have on a story. But then once I read this, I was like, okay, well, how can I take this publication seriously? As the acquisition of Psych marks one of the largest transactions in Israel's medical technologies field over recent years. If the $650 million valuation is achieved, Psych will become one of the 10 largest cannabis companies globally, joining the ranks of TLRY and Aurora. That's absolute horseshit. You'd have to start with Curaleaf if you're talking honestly about that list. And so either way, there's more down here if you wanted to pause to read, but just goes to show that big tobacco is eyeing the industry, and we can probably expect to see more down the line from them. And with that, out of Ohio, from Columbus, medical cannabis access grows. Main thing to point out from this article, state regulators have expanded the list of qualifying conditions, as they also are putting in steps to try and get adult use on the ballot in 2023. But main thing to take away from this is that the number of qualifying conditions continues to grow, now to 26, as residents annually petition the state medical board to expand the list, as cannabis is a medicine for a bunch of ailments. Who knew, right? So it's obviously very beneficial for those in the state that need access to medical cannabis, but apparently there's a massive oversupply of cannabis in Ohio, as featured in my last video too on Sunday. So there's more on that if you wanted to learn about it, but that might be one of the reasons why they're pushing for adult use, because they know that if we launch that recreational market, Maryland is benefiting, Missouri is crushing it, then we're going to see some of that supply get out, and we're going to make some money, and everyone's going to win. And so a bit more down here if you wanted to pause to read. That's out of Ohio. Well, we've got this one from New Jersey, from law.com, and I read it yesterday. I guess you might get one free read, but just figured I would share it, and I'll put the link in the description if you wanted to read it. But the article is essentially, Safe Banking Act will ease tension between New Jersey and U.S. cannabis laws. If only this was written, maybe 2.5 years ago, we would have seen progress on SAFE a little bit sooner. But I digress, just sharing this. Of course, link is in the description if you want to go through that. But with that, from Tom Angle, as analysts from Florida Governor DeSantis' office and the state legislature say in a new financial impact statement that a cannabis legalization ballot measure could generate up to $431 million in annual sales tax revenue if approved by voters in 2024. I wonder if DeSantis is now changing his mind based on this new finding, as obviously legalizing for adult use is going to bring a ton of benefits to Florida, let alone tax dollars, jobs, tourism, all that. And so more on this article if you wanted to go through it. It's very early. And we don't have an update yet. However, I do believe we are supposed to get an update on the Supreme Court ruling and the Attorney General challenging this ballot initiative. So I will update you once we get that. But of course, wanted to share this as I think it's a win in the near term, highlighting the benefits of what's going to happen in Florida if they get it on the ballot. While connoisseurs.io shares, as Smart and Safe Florida has retained the counsel of the following 3 lawyers in the Florida adult use cannabis ballot Florida Supreme Court case. That is certainly a mouthful. From Quinn, Emanuel, Urquhart, and Sullivan LLP, and then the Cato Institute. Are you familiar with any of these lawyers and their names and any work that they might have done in the past? Let me know in the comments if you are. The source comes from ACISFloridaCourts.gov. But good question here. When is the Florida Supreme Court supposed to make a decision? I thought that they were supposed to make a ruling sooner than later, but from Joe Greisler, DM'd this the other day, sorry, no link. If the Florida Supreme Court does not rule by April 1st, 2024, after hearing all the information, then the constitutional amendment will go on the ballot. However, in the past few years, they have ruled sometime in either February or March on similar matters. So just want to give you some bit of a rough timeline there, but I'll put the link to the source of this in the description if you want to check that out. With that, from Marijuana Moment, senators seek to legalize medical cannabis for veterans and enact other cannabis reforms through defense bill. And while I applaud these Democratic senators for acting like they're continuing to try, I want to point out that it was GOP House Rep Matt Gaetz that actually made the amendments to stop military testing and to allow VA and medical cannabis for veterans. And so why? Well, because veterans should have had access to medical cannabis for the last 50 years. No shit. All this to say is that if you've been paying attention, though, we also know that the GOP as a whole does not believe the NDAA is a vehicle for anything cannabis friendly. And while I know that that's bullshit, and it's not that I like it or I don't like it, it just is what it is. And so we have to figure out a way to get the GOP on board that doesn't involve shaming them, much like Tom tries to do. Is this comes after more than a dozen drug policy amendments to the House version of NDAA were blocked from floor consideration. I just see this more as a way for Tom to confirm his own bias that the Dems are better than the GOP. And it's like, look, both sides work for the same person. At what point are you going to realize that it's us versus the gov going forward? And if you stop sucking on the government's teat so much, you might, come back to our side and not be so passive-aggressive, Tom. Especially when, ironically, we get from Entrepreneur, study, 91% of military vet cannabis patients say it improved their quality of life. Could you imagine being ignored for 365 days of the year, only to ask your parents for one simple thing that you think could really help you for Christmas, and then when Christmas rolls around, they go, fuck you, we'll give you something else, make it work, and then they ignore you again for another 365 days, and then next year you ask again, and they say, fuck you, here's something different that you don't want. It just must be the definition of insanity, especially after returning from what you thought was hell. And so a bit more down here from the Journal of Clinical Therapeutics, so I'll put the original link in the description too. Most participants in the self-reported study said they use cannabis daily. It must work, must be some sort of a medicine for them. You might want to take what they have to say seriously, and so of course you can pause to read more about what the 510 US military veterans found or what they use the cannabis for. And then last bit, you can scroll down here, but worth noting is the authors said the findings should inform clinicians who work with the veteran population, as cannabis may be an effective means of helping veterans, especially women and racially minoritized members of this population, to reduce unwanted medication use. And imagine that's all you wanted, to just take less medication, and cannabis was a step in that direction. It's unbelievable. Big Pharma is living rent-free in way too many people's heads, especially those that don't need it. While from the Washington Post, smoking weed after work, a growing number of employees don't mind. So while this is the Washington Post, do take it with a grain of salt, but we'll take a cannabis-friendly headline once in a while. As more states legalize cannabis, employers are opting out of testing for the substance, either by choice, because no shit. Why on earth would you be testing for the substance? What a waste of money. Why is the federal government still testing for cannabis, especially when a worker that consumes cannabis in the evening is likely more productive than a worker that consumes alcohol and likely other substances that helps offset their alcohol addiction? But better yet, or as required by law. And it would be great if, of course, something was struck down so that at the federal level, they just stopped testing for cannabis, because why are you treating it differently than alcohol in the first place? The only thing that I wish would be is if this article is a bit more critical of the current status quo and why it ought to be changed sooner than later, as opposed to, reaching out to individuals and telling their stories, which is totally fair. It would just be great to point out the problem, which is the federal testing in the first place, and how solving that would solve a lot of problems, especially supply chain issues and, firing people for no reason. But with that, from respiratory medicine, a very interesting one. I don't believe I've shared this one yet, but from March 2023, do tobacco and cannabis use and co-use predict lung function? A longitudinal study. And I'm going to say, I'm not going to go ahead and start consuming tobacco just because of these findings, but they're very interesting. As you can pause to read the highlights. But main thing I'll scroll you down to here, results. Cigarette smoking with or without cannabis use is associated with reduced airflow. Okay, fair enough. There is no consistent association between cannabis use and measures of lung function, and the co-use of tobacco and cannabis appears to entail no additional risk to lung function beyond the risks associated with tobacco use alone. Fascinating. As persistent cigarette smoking is associated with reduced airflow even in young adults, cannabis use does not appear to be related to lung function even after years of use, which is fascinating. And so, of course, you can grab the link to go through it, but to imagine co-use of tobacco and cannabis does not appear to predict lung function beyond the effects of tobacco use alone. Imagine mixing the two offsets the damage of tobacco. It's just like, what? So I'd like to see more studies in this area, but again, fascinating findings. Well, I had this one come across my homepage, which was surprising because you rarely see cannabis in a good light there, but weed, hair growth, and a small study that researchers claim showed superior results. And even funnier is that whenever I get one of these stories across my homepage, it's usually from government-funded media, and there's no likes, just filled with dislikes and comments tearing apart the article. And for once, we actually see more likes on this one because it's common sense and why we ought to deschedule cannabis in the US to study it further. And so the study, which only involved 31 male and female patients, so it's a tiny study, can't go off of it much, with androgenetic alopecia, the most common cause of hair loss. It was published in the International Journal of Trichology, so I'll put that link in the description. But main thing is it found that every patient, 15 men and 16 women experienced hair regrowth after daily application of a topical solution containing hemp-derived cannabinoids for a period of 6 months. What? None of the patients reported any adverse side effects. That's amazing. As researchers say, these findings displayed superior results when compared to traditional hair regrowth prescription medications like finasteride and minoxidil ointments. Oh my God, for my receding hairline, this makes me feel so much better. So anyways, more down here if you wanted to pause to read. Otherwise, of course, as I mentioned, the direct study will be put in the description as well. But with that, from Mark Landers sharing this interesting one from Irish Times that says more than 3,000 people hospitalized after taking cannabis products in... And obviously that cuts off the story, but it's like, oh my God, 3,000 people were hospitalized and then went home the next day realizing that, maybe they're not what they thought they were or where they thought they were. All that to say is, this is just a direct consequence of prohibition. No shit, right? Because these are not cannabis products. These are synthetic cannabinoids. So if you actually wanted to go through and read it, it's just fascinating how they can't differentiate between the two. And this themes a call for awareness and education campaign when it's like, no, end federal prohibition and allow the legal markets to do what they do in every other industry, and you're going to have less of these synthetic cannabinoid problems of people trying to create non-safe alternatives to a natural damn plant. Like, come on, get your head out of your asses. And so with that, the fresh toast on how cannabis can help people over 60 date. And if you have maybe a lonely grandparent or parent or someone that might need it, you just hate to see someone get older and have to be alone, right? And so I feel for any older people that might want to consider cannabis so that it will help them, find love later in life. Either way, just figured I would share this as it's very interesting. You can pause to read more if you're interested. And this actually does come from a JAMA International Medicine study apparently as well. But last bits down here, some ways that it can help older adults get back into dating: reducing anxiety, increasing libido, easing pain, and providing a shared interest. And so lastly, out of Europe, the second little European country that dared to do it is getting their new cannabis laws come into effect on Friday. And this is out of Luxembourg, the second little country after Malta to legalize for adult use, at least personal consumption, no sales, unfortunately. And so good news though for those in Luxembourg, congratulations that you will get access to the plant back as you can effectively grow it and keep it in your household. However, consumption and transportation of cannabis outside of one's home remain prohibited, as do private sales, as we sadly found out that when Germany tried to launch a legal adult use program earlier this year, the European Commission struck them down because of old UN drug treaties set in place by the racist Harry J. Anslinger of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics when that was a thing back in the 50s, basically forcing all other countries to follow what the UN drug treaty wanted, meaning that the UN drug treaty overrides Germans' national sovereignty and their ability to set their own cannabis laws, which is mind-boggling. I hope those in Germany are paying attention to this and trying to make changes, although probably not, because it's not something that's going to be blasted in their mainstream. But in the near term, Germany was not able to follow through with their plans. The good news is in January 2024, from my understanding, according to Boris Jordan, executive chairman of Curaleaf, that is when cannabis will be removed from the official narcotics list in Germany, which is a step in the right direction. Effectively, we're just waiting for the US to follow suit and deschedule cannabis as they should have done decades ago. But that is it for today's episode, folks. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions, and I'd be happy to address that. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video and you learned something, please just leave a like on it. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you on Sunday for This Week in Cannabis News. Have a great week, everybody. Take care.